Hello and welcome to another chat. This one's going to return to an old favorite topic, narco-submarines. There's been a big increase in incidents of these being captured in the Atlantic. It's a pretty big deal. The Atlantic, not very forgiving. Let's talk about it. I'm H.I. Sutter. I'm a defense analyst. I focus on unconventional naval warfare. For quite a few years, I've also had an interest in narco-submarine technology. Usual caveats, this is unscripted, unedited, just a guy sharing what he knows. Let's get on with it. So, bit of context, narco submarines are normally a Pacific thing. The main routes are from Colombia up to Mexico, either directly along the Latin American coast, sometimes out from Colombia and or Ecuador to the Galapagos Islands and then back in to Mexico. But basically, in the Pacific, from Colombia and Ecuador to Mexico, and then for onwards shipment across the land border into the US. There's also some in the Caribbean, but in general, that's less common these days. Narco subs on the Pacific, Caribbean, they just use fast boats. However, there's also a transatlantic route. For this, the drugs have to go through Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, or Brazil. And they're going across to Cape Verde off Africa and or the Azores and Canary Islands, and then up to typically to Spain. By far, well, all of the known incidents, the drugs were being landed in Spain, but there's no reason, in my view, why Ireland, UK, and France aren't also, and Portugal aren't also potential landing points. This route across the Atlantic. It's much more perilous. It's a much longer distance, as you can see. It was generally thought to not be very common at all, but there's a significant increase in this route. So going back in time, there were early indications as early as 2014 that there were submarines traveling across the Atlantic. These three submarines, or low profile vessels, were captured before they left, so in the jungles of Guyana, Brazil, and Suriname. And although had no evidence, the logical conclusion was they were for transatlantic routes. Then, significantly in November 2019, one turned up in Spain and another in March 2023. This was significant in a lot of ways. It demonstrated, it proved that the trade was real, that the narco submarines were transversing the Atlantic all the way from, in these cases, Brazil. However, it was still pretty rare, I'd say. It was still not a common thing. The narco submarines that were captured in Spain, significantly, they're quite large, but they were, from a technological perspective, from a design perspective, the same as ones you would find in Pacific. In fact, some of the same designers, types of narco sub were found in the Pacific. This is one of the examples. Pretty generic. You've got fuel at the front, a big hold in the middle for the drugs. The crew sit in a cockpit, sort of approximately in the middle of the vessel, slightly towards the stern in this case, and then you have the diesel engine in the stern. Typically a single diesel driving a propeller. The hull form is approximately like a sailing yacht, but without sails or keel, obviously. Pretty stealthy, but like virtually all narco submarines, they're not really submarines at all. They're just low profile vessels. So narco submarine is a colloquial term. I use it unapologetically. If you see people in the comments explaining that narco submarines don't submerge or whatever, you know how far they listened. There are a few that are true submarines, but by far 99.9% are just low profile vessels. Okay, let's talk about the big increase in 2024. So first one off Brazil. This was found in the jungle. So before it started route, it's missing its engine. So there's normally be outboard motors at the back. It looks basically like a very big speedboat that is designed to run very low in the water. So pretty stealthy. Then in March, the US Navy and US Coast Guard seized a narco submarine off Guyana. So this was at sea, starting its route across the Atlantic. It had over 2 tons of cocaine on board. And then in June, one was spotted off France and Spain. The French actually started the hunt, and then the Spanish interdicted it. It didn't have any drugs on board, and it was actually traveling west, i.e., from Europe back to potentially back to Latin America. Open question, different theories as to why that was. I'm sure that law enforcement will have a better view. Interesting vessel. And then another one just recently off the Canary Islands, Atlantic. Again, the Spanish police interdicting this one. This was just a couple of days ago. This one only had 900, so just kilograms. That's a bit less than a metric ton of cocaine. So less than most others. That might also be that some of the cocaine had already been offloaded. I think that's a better theory. One reason to think some of the cocaine had been offloaded, this boat also turned up. It's an impressive power boat. It's a rigid inflatable boat, as you can see, very big one. 4 outboard motors. Yeah. When did you ever see a rig with 4 outboard motors? Also, look at the communications and radar and so on. Pretty sophisticated setup. It was likely for either unloading or receiving drugs, or I would suspect taking fuel to the narco sub. What's interesting though is a very conspicuous boat. This power boat is going to get attention. If you're just doing fueling, you'd think, and I think generally they're using fishing boats, trawlers, or other ships to support the narco subs in their voyage, give them food, um, uh, fuel, etc. I think the narco subs can do the entire journey on their own in extreme case, but they typically are going to rendezvous with, you know, fishing vessels and so on along the route. Okay, so how did this play out? So the first one in Brazil was on the coast there. The second one off Guyana, just starting its journey. Third one in between the Bay of Biscay, essentially, but between France and Spain. Galicia coast, that's where they're going to be landing the drugs. And then the third one, or the last, sorry, fourth, off the Canary Islands, approximately. Talk a bit about another aspect. It's not just that there's more of them, it's that they are indicative of a bigger trade. And one reason for that is if we look at the actual design of the narco subs, we can determine whether or not they were designed and built by the same person. Narco subs are typically built in batches. And if they are designed and built by the same person, it implies that they're part of the same operation, at least somewhat connected. For example, the one built captured in Spain in November 2019 was from the same designer as the one in March 2023. There are a few differences, but the family, the signature of the designer is present. And in fact, the same designer also designed some narco subs which were found in the Pacific at the same time. For a time, this was the most I wouldn't say prolific, but the most notable narco submarine designer, whoever was behind this. I think they were since arrested. However, the 3 of the last 4, which are all got internals, they all look the same at first glance. They have different signatures. They're not designed and built by the same people to the same design. First of all, if we just look at the cockpit, and an easy starting reference point is the hatch. Different designers solved the same problem different ways. The one off Guyana, the US Navy seized, has a square hatch that opens forward. The second one off Spain on June 18th has a square hatch that opens backwards. And the one in June off the Canaries has a round hatch that opens forwards. Now, of course, there's more than one design with any of those features, but when you build a batch of narco submarines, you have your way of doing it, and you do it the same on all of them. We see that, we observe that. These things aren't random. Someone thought it's better to do it this way. That's how they do it. There's other differences, but I'm going to pick just the stern as well. Another easy recognition point. If you look at the stern of the first one, it comes together at a point, but with a slight cutoff, with the exhaust running directly over the stern. The second one has sort of more of a chiseled end to it. And then the third one is similar in shape to the first, but has the exhaust way short of the actual stern. So they are different designs. Again, different people have thought, let's do it slightly a different way to how the other person did it. What that means is that these aren't a batch. It also reduces the likelihood that intelligence from one interdiction led to the subsequent interdictions. That's not impossible. We don't know that, certainly not at the moment. It's not come out for court papers or anything like that. But this is indicative of a wider trade. And also to point out that the one found off Brazil at the beginning in February used outboard motors, completely different design. And again, a design that has been observed in the Pacific. In fact, it's very common design, one of the most common designs. Whoever builds this, they're prolific. So what else other than the transatlantic trade? Just bring up to speed on a couple of other developments. Firstly, there's also a trans-Pacific trade. So far, only one has been interdicted. Implications are that the drugs are being smuggled to Australia and New Zealand. My suspicion is that the vessel doesn't necessarily transverse the whole of the Pacific. It'll probably rendezvous with another ship coming from North America, for example. Something like that. That's my guess. But this is really new development from February 2014. And then also a bit more recently in May, something really interesting turned up in the Mediterranean. There is also a smuggling route from Albania to Italy, and they have used remote control boats on several occasions. This design is quite interesting. It is a sea kayak, a fiberglass kayak that has been modified as a sort of, I wouldn't say submersible, but a low profile smuggling boat with electric motors outboard. Really interesting design. Very different, definitely short ranged, of course. So not going to be sailing across the Atlantic. But there you go. Thank you very much. If you like, please like, subscribe, share. Yeah, thank you.